The night it all ended, Callie Reeves stood in her bedroom doorway and could not move. Her right hand was pressed flat against
Something's
the
not
door
right
frame.
out there.
Her
Easy
left
now.
hand
What do
hung
you
at her
see?
side,
Riders.
fingers curled
3 of them.
inward,
Let me
like
see.
she was trying to hold on to something
The
that
rain's
wasn't
getting
there
worse.
anymore.
What if it floods?
The lamp on the
We'll
nightstand
be all right. The
cast a
diner's
warm
solid.
yellow circle across
But look
the
at
bed,
it.
and in the center of that circle, sitting perfectly still on her pillow, was a small black velvet box. She hadn't put it there. Her mother hadn't put it there. The deadbolt had been engaged when she left for work. The chair she wedged under the door handle every single night had been in place. The window latch required a key from the outside. None of that had mattered. In that moment, standing in the doorway of her own bedroom in her own apartment, Callie Reeves understood something that no one had ever been able to explain to her in words. She understood it the way you understand cold water or a broken bone, not through reason, but through the body, through the sudden animal certainty that the world you thought you were living in was not the real one. The real one was much darker. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand that night, you need to understand the 3 weeks that came before it. You need to understand a town at the edge of the Mojave Desert, a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and old grease, and a 23-year-old woman who was doing everything right and getting nothing back for it. You need to understand what it feels like to be hunted by someone who knows the law better than the law knows itself. And you need to understand that sometimes the only thing standing between a predator and his prey is the last kind of man society told you to be afraid of. This is where it begins. Needles, California sits at the eastern edge of the Mojave Desert like a comma at the end of a very long sentence, a pause before the emptiness of the open desert swallows everything. The Colorado River runs along its eastern border, flat and brown and indifferent, and in the summer, the town bakes at temperatures that make the asphalt soft underfoot. In winter, the cold comes off the desert floor in waves and the wind pushes down Route 66 like it has somewhere better to be. It is not the kind of place people choose. It is the kind of place people end up. The Desert Rose Diner stood on the south side of Route 66 about a mile from the center of town. It had been there since 1962 and it looked every year of its age, a low, flat-roof building with a neon rose sign above the door that flickered in a slow, irregular rhythm like a heart that couldn't quite commit. The parking lot was cracked asphalt and gravel. The booths inside were red vinyl patched with electrical tape in places. The counter was formica that had once been white and was now the color of old teeth. Hank Pruitt had owned the Desert Rose for 11 years. He was 62, thick through the shoulders with a white paper hat he wore slightly crooked and hands that had seen so much grease they had permanently changed color along the knuckles. He was a decent man in the way that practical men are decent. He paid his people on time. He didn't tolerate nonsense from customers, and he kept a Louisville Slugger under the register for the rare occasions when someone needed more than words. He wasn't equipped to understand the kind of danger that doesn't announce itself. He understood fists and volume. What was happening to Callie was something else entirely, and Hank Pruitt was not built to see it. Callie Reeves had worked the overnight shift at the Desert Rose for 14 months. She was 23 years old, 5'4", with dark hair she wore tied back during her shift, and dark eyes that took in more than she ever said out loud. She was the kind of pretty that doesn't know it's pretty, which made her approachable. In the way that unassuming people are approachable, there was no performance to her, no wall of self-consciousness. She moved through the diner with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned early that the world did not pause for you to catch your breath. She was raising a 4-year-old daughter named Nora on an overnight waitress salary, and whatever tips the Route 66 truck traffic felt generous enough to leave. Her mother, Deb, watched Nora during the night shifts from a cot in the second bedroom of Callie's apartment, a small second-floor walk-up in a building with peeling beige paint and a security gate that had been broken for 7 months. The apartment was small enough that you could hear everything from every room, which was both a comfort and, in recent weeks, a source of dread. Callie's life was not easy, but it was hers, and she had built it with her own hands from a position of very little, and there was a quiet dignity in that which she carried without ever naming it. She had good instincts. That is important to understand. She had been in a controlling relationship at 19, a man who tracked her movements and monitored her phone and explained always calmly and always reasonably why everything she did was wrong. She had gotten out of that. She had pulled Nora's father out of her life with the same deliberate, difficult courage, and she had rebuilt herself from the wreckage. Her instincts were not the instincts of a woman who had never been tested. They were sharp and specific, and she trusted them. Which is why from the very first night, she knew. He came in on a Tuesday 3 weeks before the night of the Velvet Box. It was just after 10 in the evening, the diner down to its skeleton crew, Callie on the floor, Hank in the back scraping the grill, a trucker named Walt, asleep in the corner booth over a plate of half-eaten eggs. The man who walked through the door was in his mid-40s. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Callie made in a month, and he wore it with the ease of someone who had never had to think about money. His hair was dark, combed back silver at the temples. His shoes were clean despite the dusty parking lot outside, which meant he had come directly from somewhere specific and had not wandered in off the road the way most people wandered in off Route 66. He took booth 4, the booth with the direct sight line to the service station. Callie brought him a menu and a glass of water. He looked at the menu, the way people look at things they have no intention of actually reading, then set it down and ordered a black coffee. His voice was smooth and low, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. When she brought the coffee, he looked at her hands as she set the cup down. "You have kind hands," he said. "Not beautiful, not pretty, hands." It was an odd enough observation that Callie registered it, filed it away in the part of her brain that cataloged things that didn't quite fit. She thanked him the way you thank anyone for an unsolicited compliment, briefly without encouragement, and went back to the service station. He sat for 40 minutes. He drank 1 cup of coffee and did not order food. When he left, he put a $50 bill on the table next to a $10 check. Callie stared at it for a moment, then pocketed it without comment. She needed every dollar for Nora's daycare, and tips were tips. She thought nothing more of it that night. But he came back the next night, and the night after that. His name, she learned from the credit card receipt, was Darryl Voss. He was always neat, always quiet, always impeccably dressed, in that way that felt slightly wrong for a roadside diner on Route 66. He never looked at the menu after the first night. He always ordered black coffee. He always sat in booth 4. And he always watched her. Not in the way that lonely people watch the only other people in a room. Not with the vague, unfocused gaze of someone passing time. He watched with the quality of attention that a person gives to something they are studying, precise, patient, with a stillness that felt engineered. He watched her pour coffee. He watched her wipe tables. He watched her speak to Hank through the kitchen pass-through. He watched the angle of her wrist when she wrote on her notepad. He watched the way she brushed a strand of hair back from her face when she was focused on something. He was cataloging her. Callie felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not loudly, but with the absolute certainty of the body saying something is different now and you need to pay attention. She mentioned it to Hank at the end of her shift on the 4th night. Hank looked out at the empty diner at booth 4 where the man had been sitting for 2 hours and shrugged. "He's a paying customer," and he said, "tips well, hasn't made a scene." "He makes me uncomfortable," Callie said. "Lots of people make me uncomfortable," Hank said. "Doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong." She nodded. She went home. She checked the deadbolt 3 times. 2 weeks and the first note appeared. She had parked behind the diner during her shift, her 2009 Honda Civic in its usual spot against the back fence. When she came out at 6 in the morning, as the first gray light was touching the desert sky, there was a single folded piece of paper tucked under the driver's side wiper. She stood in the cold morning air and read it. "You look beautiful in blue today." She had worn her blue uniform. She wore it every shift. The note was not threatening. It contained no demands, no declarations, nothing that a police report could wrap its hands around. It was on its surface a compliment, but it was a compliment delivered in the dark from someone who had stood in the parking lot behind the diner alone while she was inside working and had placed their hands on her car. That was the moment the fear changed quality. It stopped being discomfort and became something with weight and shape. She went to the Needles Sheriff's Department the next morning before she slept still in her uniform. The deputy at the front desk was a man named Roy Sasser, heavy-set, mid-50s, with the kind of face that communicated nothing. He had pale eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, like every word was being considered before it was released. He brought her into a small office that smelled of old paper and air freshener, and he sat across from her with a yellow legal pad. He listened to everything she said. He wrote things down. He nodded at appropriate intervals with an expression of measured concern, and then he asked a question that didn't fit. "Has he left you anything yet?" "Any gifts, maybe. Anything at the apartment? Callie stopped. She looked at him. No, she said. Just the note on the car. Something moved across Sasser's face. It was not relief exactly. It was subtler than that, more controlled. It was the micro-expression of a man who has just received information he was checking for. He settled back slightly in his chair, and when he spoke again, his voice had the practiced texture of someone reading from a script that had served him well before. Well, Miss Reeves, he said, setting the pen down, what you're describing is concerning. I want you to know I hear you. But at this point, technically speaking, no law has been broken. A man can sit in a public restaurant. He can leave a note that contains no threat. The parking lot behind the diner is accessible. He spread his hands in a gesture meant to convey helplessness, but what it communicated to Callie's sharpened instincts was something else entirely. It communicated completion, as if this conversation was going exactly where he expected it to go. Until he does something actionable, there isn't much I can do. You can file a report, and I'll take that report, but... He knows where I work, Callie said. He knows what I wear. A lot of people know where you work, Sasser said. You work at a diner on Route 66. She filed the report. She walked out into the hard morning sunlight of Needles and stood next to her car in the parking lot of the sheriff's department and tried to name what she had just felt in that office. It wasn't the brush-off she had expected. She had prepared herself for indifference and bureaucratic fatigue. What she had received was something more deliberate. Sasser had been measuring something. He had asked his one strange question and received the answer he needed, and then had closed the door on her as efficiently as if he were finishing an inventory check. She drove home. She locked the deadbolt. She checked it 3 times, then a 4th. She did not sleep well. On the 14th day, the text messages began. She was in the middle of a dinner rush, not a real rush, just a modest surge that happened around 9, when the truckers and the highway travelers came in before the long dead stretch of midnight when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out quickly between tables, expecting a message from her mother about Nora. The number was one she didn't recognize. The message was 4 words. Your hair looks prettier down. She was wearing her hair up. She always wore it up for work. She stood at the service station with the phone in her hand and felt the floor of her world shift in the specific way it shifts when something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. He had her number. She had never given it to him. She had never given it to anyone connected to him. She had changed her route home. She parked around the block on alternate nights. She had taken every precaution that a person could reasonably take within the bounds of a life that still had to be lived with a child who still had to be fed and a rent check that still had to be written. He had her number anyway. She looked up slowly from the phone toward booth 4. Darrell Voss was holding his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He was not drinking. He was watching her with his head tilted very slightly to one side, the way a scientist tilts their head toward a specimen that is behaving in an interesting way. When her eyes met his, he raised the cup in a small, deliberate motion, a toast. Callie set the phone face down on the counter. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the formica and breathed through her nose, slow and controlled, the way she had learned to breathe in the years since she had last let fear make her decisions for her. Then she walked back to the service station, picked up the coffee pot, and kept working. Because she had a 4-year-old daughter asleep in an apartment 3 miles away, and quitting was not something she could afford. The 3rd week brought the event that changed everything. Nora attended a small daycare and preschool program 6 blocks from the apartment, a cheerful, low-slung building with a painted mural on the outside wall and a chain-link fence around the small yard. Callie's mother brought Nora there in the mornings on the days Callie worked nights after Callie had come home and slept a few hours. It was a routine as stable and unremarkable as breathing. On a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks into the nightmare, Callie's mother called her while she was sleeping. Her voice was carefully level in the way that mothers make their voices level when they are frightened and do not want their daughters to know how frightened they are. There's a man outside the fence at Nora's school, she said. He's just standing there. Callie was in her car in under 2 minutes, still pulling her jacket on as she drove. When she arrived, the man was gone. He had left one thing behind: a single wildflower, the kind that grows in the gravel shoulders of desert highways, threaded through the chain-link fence at approximately the height of a small child's face. There was no note, no name, no threat. Just a flower in a fence placed there by hands that had been standing outside a preschool in the middle of the afternoon, watching children in a yard. Callie stood on the sidewalk and looked at the flower for a long time. The fear she felt in that moment was different from every other kind of fear she had felt in the previous 3 weeks. The other fears had been about her safety, her apartment, her body. This fear was about Nora, and fear about your child lives in a completely different place in the body. It doesn't shake you, it goes very still. It becomes something cold and hard and perfectly clear. She pulled the flower out of the fence. She put it in her jacket pocket. She went inside to get Nora and held her daughter against her chest in the hallway of the daycare for a long moment, long enough that Nora patted her on the back the way small children do when they sense that adults need comfort but don't know how to name it. "It's okay, Mama," Nora said. Callie drove home. She checked the deadbolt. She sat at the kitchen table for an hour while her mother made tea. Neither of them drank, and the apartment was very quiet around them. He wasn't watching her anymore, not really. He was showing her what he could reach. That night at 11:45, it rained. Not the hesitant desert rain that sometimes passed over needles like an apology. This was a real rain, heavy and cold, turning Route 66 into a mirror of headlights and reflections. The Desert Rose was empty, except for Callie Hank in the back, and Walt the trucker asleep over his eggs again in the corner booth. Darrell Voss had been in booth 4 for 20 minutes, nursing a coffee. He hadn't touched his phone on the table, his eyes on Callie. At 11:52, the bell above the door jangled hard against the wall. The wind came in, first cold and smelling of rain and asphalt, and something underneath that was darker, mechanical, like hot metal. Then the boots hit the floor, heavy and deliberate. Then the men. There were 4 of them. They were massive in the way that some men are massive, not just large, but occupying space differently than ordinary people, filling doorways and making rooms rearrange themselves around their presence. They were soaked from the rain. Leather cuts dark with water beards, dripping helmets under their arms. They moved with the unhurried, self-contained certainty of men who had walked into 100 rooms like this one and had never once considered whether the room would welcome them. The patches on the backs of their cuts showed a grinning death's head in red and white. Below it, the 2 words that most people in America knew better than to challenge: Hell's Angels. The atmosphere in the Desert Rose changed the way atmosphere changes before lightning. Not gradually, but all at once, a single shift from one state of being to another. Walt the trucker woke up and looked at his eggs. Hank turned the radio down in the back without being asked. Even Darrell Voss in booth 4 went still, his eyes moving to the door with a new quality of attention. The 4 men took seats at the counter directly in front of Callie's station. The one in the middle was the reason people got out of the way. He was 6'4" at least, with the kind of build that suggested he had spent decades doing hard physical work and hadn't stopped. His arms were covered in faded tattoos that had blurred at the edges, the way old tattoos do landscapes instead of pictures. His beard was gray and thick braided at the chin with a small piece of leather cord. His eyes, when he took off his riding glasses, were blue, clear, and sharp, and so steady that looking into them felt less like meeting someone's gaze and more like looking at a fixed point in a moving world. The patch on his chest read, President, the name stitched beneath it, small and plain stone. Callie stood at the service station and looked at this man and felt her fear perform a strange maneuver. It didn't leave, but it moved, shifted its aim from booth 4 to the counter, recalibrating with the animal urgency of a person who suddenly had 2 things to be afraid of and couldn't hold both at once. Coffee, the man called Stone said. His voice was gravel at the bottom of a deep well, low and rough and carrying without effort. Black, 4 cups, keep them coming. Yes, sir, Callie said. She reached for the coffee pot. Her hands were shaking. They had been shaking at varying intensities for 3 weeks now, and when she leaned to pour the first cup, the pot tapped the ceramic mug, and a wave of black coffee rolled across the counter, scalding hot, stopping an inch from the man's leather gloves. She grabbed a rag, apologies already spilling out of her, bracing herself for the anger, for the raised voice, for the demand to see the manager that would follow any spilled coffee in any diner in America. A hand, enormous, weathered, bearing a ring on the middle finger that looked like it had been cast from something salvaged, came down gently over hers. Not grabbing, just stopping. Callie looked up. Stone had taken off his glasses and he was looking at her with an expression that contained no anger whatsoever. What it contained was harder to name. It was the look of a man who had learned to read people the way navigators read weather. Not for aesthetics, but for information, because the information mattered. Breathe, he said quietly enough that it was between the two of them. It's just coffee. Nobody died. He released her hand. She steadied the pot. The other three bikers, a wiry man with a long, dark goatee whose cut read flint, a broad-chested man with a shaved head whose cut read cinder, and a smaller, precise-moving man with wire-rimmed glasses whose cut read wrench, were watching without staring the particular talent of men who are alert without performing their alertness. Stone looked at her hands, then at her face, then so briefly that she almost missed it toward the booths behind her. You okay? He asked the same quiet register below the ambient noise of rain and road. You've been shaking since we walked in, and it ain't because of us. Callie looked at him. She looked at the patch on his chest. She thought about everything she had been told about men like this, what they were, what they represented, where they fell in the taxonomy of people worth trusting. She thought about Deputy Sasser with his yellow legal pad and his one strange question and his hands spread wide in performed helplessness. She thought about Nora asleep 3 miles away and a wildflower threaded through a chain-link fence. And then because she had run out of options that came from the world she was supposed to trust, she stepped forward until she was close enough to the counter that her voice wouldn't carry, and she leaned in until she was a foot from this man's weathered face, and she said the 6 words that changed everything. That man won't stop following me. She tilted her head barely just enough to indicate the direction of booth 4 without looking at it directly. Stone did not turn around. He did not shift in his seat. He did not change his expression. He picked up the coffee cup she had finally managed to fill, brought it to his mouth, and took a slow sip. When he set it down, his voice was the same low gravel it had been from the first word he had spoken to her. Go to the back, he said. Bring me a slice of pie. Don't come out till I call you. Callie straightened. She looked at him for one more second, this enormous gray-bearded man in his death's head leather, offering her the only directive that had felt like an actual plan in 3 weeks of fear, and then she went to the kitchen. The swinging door closed behind her with a soft whomp of displaced air. Through the small circular window in the door, she watched. Stone did not rush. That was the first thing she noticed, the absolute absence of hurry in everything he did. He finished his coffee in 3 unhurried sips. He set the cup down with the solid, deliberate placement of a man who meant for things to stay where he put them. Then he stood up from his stool. He was even larger upright. The diner seemed to contract around him. He walked across the black and white checkered linoleum with the slow tectonic movement of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. He stopped at the edge of booth 4 and stood there for a moment, just stood looking down at the man sitting in it. Darrell Voss had not looked up immediately. He had continued writing in his small leather-bound notebook, the scratch of his pen audible even through the kitchen window. Then the pen stopped. He looked up. His expression was the expression of a man interrupted during a private meeting, mild, contained, and carrying beneath it a very precise calculation of the disruption. Can I help you? Voss said. Stone didn't answer. He simply slid into the booth across from him, his massive frame consuming the space like weather filling a room. He placed his coffee cup on the table next to Voss's phone. Then he sat there and looked at the man across from him with those steady blue eyes. Nice phone, he said. Voss held his gaze for a moment, then leaned back. The practiced ease of a man who had been in rooms with people who wanted to intimidate him before. Is there a reason you're sitting here? I believe I was enjoying some privacy. You ordered coffee, Stone said, and you've been nursing it for 45 minutes. You ain't drinking and you ain't eating, so I'm wondering what exactly it is you're doing. I'm observing, Voss said. Last I checked, that's still legal. Lots of things are legal, Stone said, leaning forward now, elbows on the table, shrinking the space between them. Lots of things that are legal are still worth discussing. Voss looked at Stone with the focused calculation of a man deciding how much this disruption was going to cost him. He adjusted his tie, a small, precise movement that was more about reclaiming composure than adjusting fabric. I don't know what the young lady may have told you, he said, his voice dropping to the smooth, reasonable register of a man who had spent years being the most articulate person in every room he entered. But I'm simply a customer. Any attention I may have paid to the staff is entirely... She has a daughter, Stone said. The sentence fell onto the table like something heavy. 4 years old. Stone continued, his voice going very quiet in a way that was far more dangerous than volume. Single mom, night shift, trying to make ends meet, and you've been parking outside her apartment complex, and you texted her tonight about her hair. Voss opened his mouth. Don't, Stone said. The single syllable was not loud. It was not accompanied by any visible physical threat. It was simply delivered with the absolute authority of a man who had said that word before in situations considerably more serious than this one and had always been obeyed. Voss closed his mouth. Stone reached across the table. His hand moved with a speed that was incongruous with his massive frame, the speed of a man who had spent decades in situations where being slow had consequences. He took Darrell Voss's wrist in his hand and squeezed. Not breaking, not explosive, precise and measured the grip of a man who understood exactly how much pressure produced exactly how much result. Voss's face went from composed to pained to something approaching the edge of genuine fear in approximately 2 seconds. He made no sound, he was too controlled for that, but his carefully maintained composure fractured at the edges in a way that was visible from the kitchen door where Callie watched with her hand pressed over her mouth. Stone held the grip for 5 seconds. Then he released it. Voss pulled his hand back and cradled it against his chest, breathing carefully. Here's how this works, Stone said, leaning back now, his voice returning to its baseline low register. You don't come here anymore. You don't drive down her street. You don't text her. You don't think about her. A pause. If I find out you've been within 5 miles of Callie Reeves, I won't be calling the police. Voss looked at him. In his eyes, working through the pain and the disrupted composure was the calculation. Again, the cold, specific calculation of a man sorting through his options and deciding which one still applied. You have no idea who I am, Voss said quietly. You have no idea who my family is. A man like you threatening a man like me, do you understand what that means for you? Pay your bill, Stone said. Leave a big tip and get out. Voss stared at him for a long moment. Then he stood with whatever dignity he could reassemble. He took a folded bill from his money clip without looking at it and dropped it on the table. He picked up his notebook. He smoothed his jacket with both hands, the right hand first and the left hand moving more carefully the way you move a hand that has recently been reminded of its own bones. He walked to the door. Just before he pushed through it, he stopped, not turning around, not looking back at Stone, but stopping. And in the brief stillness of that pause with the rain on the window and the diner silent around him, he smiled. Not at anyone in particular, just smiled. Then he walked out. The bell jangled. The door closed. Through the rain-streaked window, the silver BMW pulled out of the lot and disappeared into the dark on Route 66. In the kitchen, Callie let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like the entire span of the previous 3 weeks. Her legs went soft and she put a hand on the industrial refrigerator to steady herself. The kitchen door swung open. Stone stood in the doorway filling it, looking down at her with those clear blue eyes. He looked at her for a moment without speaking, the way you look at someone you are assessing not clinically, but with the attention of a person who wants to know what state you're actually in beneath the state you're presenting. Get your things, he said. We're taking you home. It was almost 1 in the morning when the convoy moved down Route 66. Callie drove her Civic. In front of her, Stone's Harley cut through the headlights of oncoming trucks, steady and unhurried. Behind her, Flint and Cinder rode side by side, their engines a low protective rumble that she felt through the chassis of her car. Wrench brought up the rear, the smallest of the 4, but somehow no less present. For the first time in 3 weeks, Callie did not check her rearview mirror every 30 seconds. The night felt different. The road felt different. She was not in that moment a woman alone on a desert highway. She was something surrounded, and the surrounding felt nothing like captivity. It felt like the first solid ground she had stood on in a very long time. They pulled up to her apartment complex, the peeling beige building with the broken security gate, and Stone walked her to the stairwell. He looked around the parking lot before they stopped, not casually with the methodical scan of a man who had spent decades learning to read environments for what they were hiding. You got your keys, he said. Yes. Check them before you need them. Never stand at a door looking for keys. She nodded. She looked at him in the dim light from the stairwell fixture. Thank you, she said. I didn't know what else to do. Stone looked at the street for a moment. Something moved through his expression, something private related to something she wasn't part of. I had a daughter, he said. His voice had lost some of its gravel. It was the same voice, the same register, but with a weight in it that hadn't been there before. Her name was Danny. She was 22. Someone bothered her too. A pause that had texture to it. I was doing time when she needed me. By the time I got out, he stopped. His jaw tightened. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I got one more chance to do right, he said. I don't intend to waste it. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a small white card with a phone number written on it in plain ballpoint pen. He held it out. That's my direct line, he said. Not the clubhouse. Mine. You see him, you hear something, you get a bad feeling, you call that number first. Before 911, before anyone else. Callie took the card. Stone looked at the apartment building once more. We'll wait till you've got the lights on. She went up the stairs. She unlocked the deadbolt, first try keys already in hand. She unlocked the handle lock. She pushed through the door into the small, warm, cluttered living room with Nora's toys on the floor and her mother's reading glasses on the couch cushion and all the dense, specific evidence of a life being lived. She went to the window and waved. Down in the lot, Stone raised one fist, a single brief acknowledgement. Then the four of them fired their engines and rolled out of the lot and onto Route 66, the sound of their machines fading down into the desert dark. Callie locked the deadbolt. She engaged the handle lock. She wedged the dining chair under the doorknob. She went to Nora's room and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to her daughter breathe. Then she went to her own room to change out of her uniform. She was unbuttoning her shirt when she saw it. On her pillow, in the center of the lamplight circle, a small black velvet box. Callie's hands went still on her shirt buttons. She had checked the deadbolt before she left. She had wedged the chair. The window latch was the kind that required a key from the outside. None of that had mattered, though. She crossed the room without deciding to her feet moving before her mind had finished processing what her eyes were telling it. Her fingers found the clasp of the box and pressed it open before the rest of her had fully caught up with what she was doing. Inside it was a locket, silver old tarnished, dark at the edges. She turned it over in her palm. She found the inner clasp. She pressed it. The locket opened. Inside was a photograph. Small, slightly dark, taken from a distance. A woman asleep in a bed. Dark hair spread across a pillow. A window visible in the background showing the faint gray of pre-dawn light. Callie's bed, Callie's pillow, Callie's window. The photograph had been taken tonight, before she had left for work. The room seemed to breathe around her. The silence of the apartment, which had always been the comfortable silence of a small home at rest, was now something else. It had the hell-breath quality of a space that was trying not to reveal what had happened inside it while she was gone. He had been in this room. He had stood where she was standing. He had watched her sleep. He had left this behind not as a threat and not as a gift, but as a message with only one meaning. I can reach you whenever I want, and I want you to know it. Callie's hand closed around the locket. She did not call 911. Deputy Sasser, with his yellow legal pad and his one careful question, had closed that door for her more completely than he probably realized. The police had told her what they could do, which was nothing, and now she understood more clearly than before exactly why the answer had been nothing. She reached into her apron pocket and took out the small white card with the plain ballpoint number. She dialed. It rang once. Yeah, Stone's voice. Flat and immediate, the voice of a man who does not miss calls. He was here. Her voice was steadier than she expected. He was inside. He left something. A picture. Her breath caught once briefly. A picture of me sleeping. He was in my room. A pause on the line. Not hesitation, calculation. We're turning around, Stone said. She heard the sound of a U-turn in the background, the sharp lean of a bike engine's repitching. Lock the bedroom door. Get Nora. Go to the bathroom. Lock that door too. Do not open it for anyone until you hear my voice. Okay, she said. 3 minutes, Callie. Hold on. She held on. They came in under 4 minutes. Callie heard the engines before she heard anything else, the deep rolling thunder of 4 Harleys coming hard down the street outside, the pitch of them dropping as they decelerated the sudden silence when they killed the motors. Then boots on the exterior staircase fast and heavy. Then Stone's voice through the bathroom door, no louder than necessary. Callie, it's Stone. Come out. She had been sitting on the edge of the bathtub with Nora in her lap and her mother pressed against the wall beside her. Nora was half asleep and confused, her small, warm weight an anchor against the cold that had settled in Callie's chest the moment she had seen the locket. Deb had not said a word since Callie had pulled her from the car and moved them all into the bathroom. She was 61 years old, and she had the particular stillness of a woman who had raised a daughter alone through difficult circumstances and understood that there were moments when questions cost more than they were worth. Callie unlocked the bathroom door. Stone filled the hallway. Behind him, Flint and Wrench were moving through the apartment with focused efficiency, checking corners, opening closet doors, moving with the practiced coordination of men who had cleared spaces before under considerably higher stakes. Cinder stood at the front door, facing out his back to the apartment. "Clear," Flint called from the bedroom. "Clear," Wrench called from the kitchen. Only then did Stone step back from the hallway and look at Callie fully. He looked at Nora, still half asleep against her mother's shoulder. He looked at Deb, pale and rigid against the bathroom wall. Then he looked at Callie's face, reading it the way he had read it at the diner counter, looking for what was actually there rather than what was being presented. "Where is it?" he said. Callie led him to the bedroom. The locket was on the floor where she had dropped it when her legs had given out, the black velvet box fallen open beside it. Stone crouched down and looked at it without touching it. He reached into his vest and produced a handkerchief, worn cotton, folded in quarters, and used it to pick up the locket. He opened it. He looked at the photograph inside for a long time. When he stood up, the muscle along his jaw was working. "He picked the lock," Stone said. Not a question. He was looking at the bedroom window, at the door frame, assembling something in his mind. "Came in while your mother was sleeping in the next room. Watched you sleep. Took this and left it on your pillow." He folded the handkerchief carefully around the locket. "He didn't touch anything else." "No," Callie said. "He's not doing this because he couldn't control himself," Wrench said from the doorway. He was the smallest of the four, precise in his movements, and he spoke with the economical clarity of someone accustomed to diagnosing problems. "This is calibrated. He wants her to know the perimeter doesn't exist. The fear is the objective." Stone looked at him, once a look that confirmed agreement without requiring words. Then he looked back at Callie. "Pack a bag," he said. "You and Nora and your mother, enough for a few days. Somewhere he can't reach you." He paused. "You're coming with us." Deb, standing in the doorway behind Wrench, made a sound that was not quite a word. Callie looked at her mother, at the fear in her face, and underneath it, competing with it, the same assessment Callie herself was running. "Who do you trust when the people you were supposed to trust have already failed you, Mom?" Callie said quietly. "Pack a bag." Deb looked at Stone for a long moment. Stone looked back at her without expression, patient as stone. Then Deb nodded once and went to the second bedroom. Callie packed in 8 minutes. She had learned in her years of navigating difficult situations with limited resources how to reduce her life to essentials quickly. She took clothes for Nora first, then herself, then the small, fireproof box from the back of her closet that contained their birth certificates and her lease, in $200 in emergency cash. She had been building $20 at a time for the past year. She paused at the door of the apartment on her way out. She looked back at this place she had made for herself and her daughter. The small couch, the toys on the floor, the reading glasses on the cushion. All the evidence of a life arranged around a child's needs. She thought about how long it had taken her to make this place feel like home. She thought about the man who had stood in her bedroom tonight in the dark watching her sleep. She turned off the light and closed the door. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, chapter based out of the Needles and Barstow corridor, occupied a compound on the western edge of Needles Industrial District in a stretch of low commercial buildings and storage facilities that sat between the railroad tracks and the edge of the open desert. From the outside, it looked like a warehouse, a long, flat-roofed building of reinforced concrete with a steel roll door and no windows facing the street. The fence around the property was 8 feet of chain link, topped with razor wire, and the gate required both a code and a physical key. Inside the fence were security cameras on all 4 corners, 2 large dogs of indeterminate breed who investigated all arrivals with professional thoroughness, in a parking area that held at this particular moment 11 motorcycles in various states of assembly. Inside the building was something that Callie had not expected. It was clean. Not sterile, not decorated, but clean in the way that a place is clean when the people who use it take it seriously. The main room was large with exposed steel beams overhead and a bar along one wall that was closed and dark at this hour. Heavy tables occupied the center of the space. Folding chairs were stacked neatly against one wall. In a side room through an open door, Callie could see a couch and a television. Down a hallway, doors to smaller rooms. Three men were already awake when they arrived, sitting at one of the center tables with coffee, and they stood when Stone came in with Callie's family behind him. They did not stare. They assessed the situation in a single glance, and then moved one of them, going immediately to find a room for Deb and Nora, the other two drifting towards Stone for the briefing that clearly needed to happen. Within 20 minutes, Nora was asleep in a small, clean room, normally used for visiting members from other chapters, her grandmother on a cot beside her. The room had a solid interior bolt. Stone showed it to Deb personally before he left, and Deb bolted it without being asked. Callie did not sleep. She sat at one of the center tables and drank coffee that was better than she expected, and listened to the building settle around her, and tried to locate the feeling that was running underneath the fear. She found it after a while. It was something close to clarity. The situation was terrible. The situation was also for the first time in 3 weeks defined. She was somewhere specific with specific people, and there was a plan being formed in the room behind the closed door at the end of the hall. That was more than she'd had yesterday. When Stone came out an hour later, he brought Wrench with him in a laptop that Wrench set up at the end of the table where Callie was sitting. Flint and Cinder settled into chairs against the wall. Two more men that Callie hadn't met came in and stood near the bar, coffee in hand, present but peripheral. Stone sat across from her. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning, all of it." She did. She was a precise narrator. She'd had 3 weeks to turn the events over in her mind until they were worn smooth, and she delivered them in order, without embellishment, noting the things that had felt specifically wrong alongside the things that had felt generally threatening. She told him about Sasser's strange question. She told him about the flower in the fence. She told him about the text messages, the note on the car, the credit card receipt with the name she'd memorized without meaning to. Daryl Voss, Booth 4, 3 weeks of patient, calibrated escalation. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Wrench," Stone said. Wrench was already typing. "I pulled the plates from the parking lot camera before we left the diner," he said without looking up. "Running them now." The compound was quiet around them. Outside, the desert night pressed against the walls, and the train tracks 2 blocks east carried a freight train through town, its horn a long, mournful note that faded west. Callie wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and waited. Wrench stopped typing. He looked at his screen. He looked at it for long enough that Stone said his name once, a quiet prompt. "The plates on the BMW," Wrench said, "are registered to a Daryl Eugene Voss." He paused. Daryl Eugene Voss died in Flagstaff, Arizona in 2003. Liver failure. He was 61 years old. The room absorbed this. "He's using a dead man's identity," Flint said from the wall. "High-end identity theft," Wrench confirmed. "Not a street-level job. The DMV record is clean. The registration history is clean. There are credit accounts going back 4 years under this name. Whoever built this identity had resources and time." He turned the laptop, slightly checking something from a different angle. "I'm running facial recognition through a private server. Give me a few minutes." Stone looked at Callie across the table. "You said Sasser asked you if he'd left any gifts yet," Stone said. "He asked if he'd left anything. Any gifts, like he was checking for something specific." Stone's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "That's a very specific question for a deputy taking an initial report." "I know," Callie said. "I've been thinking about it since I walked out of his office." Wrench's laptop made a soft sound. Wrench leaned toward the screen. His posture changed the change of a person whose search has returned something unexpected. He read in silence for a moment, scrolling slowly. "I've got him," Wrench said. He turned the laptop around so the table could see the screen. The driver's license photograph showed the man from the diner, the charcoal suit, the practiced expression, the eyes with their strange, precise quality. But the name beneath the photograph was not Daryl Voss. The name was Elliot Farrow. Wrench let that sit for exactly 1 second. Then, son of Judge Harlan Farrow, federal judge San Bernardino, appointed to the bench 14 years ago, currently serving on the Ninth Circuit. A sound went through the room, not loud, not dramatic, just a collective exhalation of men who had just had something confirmed that they had already suspected in outline. "Denver." Wrench continued reiterating, now his voice taking on the flat precision of a man delivering a diagnostic report. 6 years ago, 3 women reported missing over an 18-month period. Ellen Marsh, 29, Patricia Dowd, 31, Susan Alcott, 26. He paused. Elliot Farrow was identified as a person of interest in all 3 cases by the Denver Police Department's Missing Persons Unit. He was never charged. The investigation into his involvement was closed twice. Evidence log from the second closure shows materials listed as misplaced during an interdepartmental transfer. He looked up over his glasses. The lead detective on both closures received a commendation and a promotion within 90 days of each closure. No one said anything. Stone was looking at the driver's license photograph on the screen. His face was completely still, the way certain faces go still when the internal landscape is moving very fast and the exterior has been trained over decades to show nothing. Wrench, he said. Already on it. Wrench said, turning the laptop back and typing again. A minute passed, 2, then he stopped. He did not turn the laptop around this time. He looked at Stone directly. Roy Sasser, he said, served as a deputy with the Denver County Sheriff's Office from 16 years ago until 8 months ago. Another pause. He was assigned to the administrative division that handled evidence storage and transfer during the period when the Farrow investigation materials were misplaced. He looked down at the screen once more. He received an above-average performance review and a lateral transfer to the Needles Sheriff's Department 8 months ago. He looked up. Elliot Farrow moved to Needles under the Darrell Voss identity 6 months ago, 2 months after Sasser arrived. The silence this time was of a different quality. It was the silence of a room in which something large and ugly had just been named for the first time out loud. He wasn't transferred, Cinder said from the wall. He was deployed. Sasser came first to get the ground ready, Flint said. Handle the local infrastructure. Make sure any report filed by anyone Farrow took an interest in went nowhere. Stone stood up from the table. He walked to the end of the room and stood there with his back to everyone for a moment, looking at the steel roll door. Callie watched him. She could feel the understanding arranging itself in her mind with the cold geometric precision of something that has always been true and is only now being seen clearly. The visit to Sasser's office, his question about gifts, his performed helplessness, the specific way the door had closed on her as she left. Sasser had not been indifferent to her fear. He had been monitoring its progress. He had been doing his job, not the job on his badge, but the job he had actually been sent to Needles to do. He's done this before, she said. Everyone looked at her. Denver, 3 women. She kept her voice level because the alternative was something she couldn't afford right now. He's done all of this before, the identity, the watching the escalation, the gifts left in places they shouldn't be. She paused. Those women didn't disappear because he lost control. He planned it. The whole thing from the first night in the diner to... She stopped. She thought about a wildflower and a chain-link fence. She thought about a black velvet box in a bottom. He's on a schedule, she said, and he's been on one this whole time. Stone turned around. He looked at her across the room with those steady blue eyes. Wrench, he said. There's a cabin registered to a holding company that traces back to a Farrow family trust, Wrench said. Outside 29 Palms, remote access road. Been in the trust for 9 years. Stone nodded once. Then he picked up his phone and walked to the far end of the room and made a call. Callie couldn't hear the conversation. She watched Stone's back, the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, the single long pause in the middle of the call when he listened to something that made him go very still. When he came back to the table, he set his phone down with the same deliberate placement he used for everything. FBI Los Angeles, he said. I know a man there. Good man straight. He told me that Judge Harlan Farrow has had a relationship with the regional field office director for 11 years. They were in the same law school class. He let that sit for a moment. He told me that any investigation opened on the Farrow family at this level would require evidence that cannot be touched by anyone with a connection to that office. He told me, he paused and something moved across his face that was not quite bitterness and not quite resignation, but somewhere in the territory of both, that they need something clean, something that's already in the public record before anyone in that system can get to it. A confession, Callie said. Stone looked at her. On camera, she said. in front of witnesses who can't be bought. The room was very quiet. There's a woman at the LA Times, Wrench said. Her name is Margot Ellison. She's been building a file on Judge Harlan Farrow for 3 years. Judicial interference, evidence suppression, 2 instances of witness intimidation in federal cases. She can't publish without a primary source willing to go on record, and every primary source she's found has recanted before the story runs. He looked at Stone. If she had a live feed time-stamped and server-backed before anyone could intervene, it would already be out, Stone said, before Sasser or anyone else could make a single phone call. The plan, when Stone laid it out, was specific and ruthless in its simplicity. Callie would go back to work at the Desert Rose. She would be alone on the floor, Hank Pruitt given a convincing reason to stay home. The parking lot would be arranged to discourage casual traffic. Wrench would place a device on Callie's person that had transmitted audio and video simultaneously to 3 destinations: the FBI Los Angeles field office, the ACLU regional director, and Margot Ellison at the Times, who Wrench had already contacted and who was at this moment sitting in her car outside her apartment in Silver Lake waiting for a call. The Hells Angels, 50 members drawn from 3 chapters, summoned through a chain of calls made quietly in the past hour, would position themselves in the dark around the Desert Rose, in the field across Route 66, behind the diner, along the access road, inside a broken-down semi-truck that Flint was already arranging to park across the main entrance, on the flat roof of the diner itself, not visible, not present, just there in the dark the way the desert is always there, vast and patient and capable of things that surprise people who thought they understood it. Elliot Farrow would come. Wrench was certain of this with the specific certainty of a man who had read the complete pattern. Callie's disappearance for 2 days had disrupted the schedule in his mind, and men like Farrow, when their schedules were disrupted, accelerated. When he comes in, Stone said, looking at Callie, he will talk. They always talk. A man like him needs you to understand why he wins. He needs to explain it. A pause. You don't have to do anything except let him explain. The device will do the rest. And if he doesn't talk, Callie said, then we come in, Stone said, before anything happens to you. I need to ask you something, she said. Stone waited. Why are you doing this? She said it without accusation, without the performance of gratitude or suspicion. She said it the way she said things when she actually needed to know the answer. You don't know me. I spilled coffee on your counter and whispered 6 words at you. You could have walked away. Stone was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't the absence of something, but the presence of something being organized carefully before it is released. Danny was 22, he said. She worked a retail job, saved her money, had an apartment with a roommate and a cat, and plans she'd written in a journal she kept on her nightstand. He looked at his hands on the table, the ring, the tattoos, the particular wear of a man who had spent his life in motion. Someone started watching her. She told me about it on the phone one Sunday. Said it was probably nothing. I told her to trust her gut and to call me if it got worse. A pause that had the texture of something that had been turned over 10,000 times. 6 weeks later, I got a call that she was gone. I was in a federal facility in Nevada. There was nothing I could do from inside those walls except understand very clearly that I had failed my child. He looked up from his hands. The man who watched Danny was never found, he said. The case is still open. Her roommate still calls me on her birthday. He was very still. I have spent 4 years with that, and I have understood in those 4 years that the only thing I can do about it now is be somewhere else the next time it happens. He leaned forward slightly. You are not nothing to me, he said. You are a 23-year-old woman with a 4-year-old daughter who came and asked for help the only way she had left. And I am a 54-year-old man who was somewhere else when it mattered the last time, bless you. He sat back. So, this is what I'm doing and why. Callie looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay, you understand, or okay, you'll do it. Both, she said. There were things to arrange, and they arranged them. Wrench spent 40 minutes going over the device with Callie at the table, how it worked, how to wear it under her uniform, what it would and wouldn't pick up, what she should and shouldn't do with her hands when she was wearing it. He was patient and precise, and he checked his own explanations, twice the habit of a man who had learned that technical details matter most when people are operating under stress. Flint coordinated the positioning of the 50 members by phone, moving quietly through the compound, his voice low and his instructions specific. Callie could hear fragments from across the room, compass points, timing intervals, the names of vehicles, and the precision of it was its own kind of reassurance. These were not men improvising. They had done things that required planning before. Cinder found a road atlas and spread it on the bar and marked the access road to the cabin outside 29 Palms in red, and the satellite images Wrench pulled showed a remote property surrounded on three sides by open desert with a single track road and no neighboring structures within 2 miles. Whatever Farrow used that cabin for, he used it in complete isolation. At 3 in the morning, the compound was quiet again. Most of the men had dispersed to their positions or gone to sleep in preparation for the following night. The main room held only Stone Wrench at his laptop and Callie at the far end of the table. Stone went outside. Callie watched through the gap in the roll door as he walked to the far side of the compound yard past the motorcycles to a low concrete barrier at the edge of the property. He stood there with his back to the building, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at nothing at the flat dark of the desert floor and the sky above it with its cold winter stars. After a moment, Flint came out and stood beside him. Neither man spoke for a long time. Callie watched from the doorway. Then Stone said something. She was too far to hear the words, but she saw Flint nod once, and she saw Stone take out his phone and look at the screen for a moment, not with the action of someone checking messages, but with the stillness of someone looking at a photograph. She understood without needing to be told what photograph it was. She thought about Danny. She thought about what it cost a man to carry that weight for 4 years, the daily specific knowledge of having been absent at the moment that mattered most and still choose to stand up when it happened to someone else. To not let the failure become an excuse for further absence, but to let it become instead a reason to be precisely unambiguously present. She stepped back from the doorway and returned to the table. She picked up her coffee mug and found it cold, so she went behind the bar and found the coffee maker and started a fresh pot because the night was long and the morning would bring work and someone in this building should keep the coffee going. She was still at the coffee maker when she heard Stone come back inside. He stopped when he saw her at the bar. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "No," he agreed. She poured 2 cups and brought them to the table and set them down, and they sat in the quiet of the compound for a while, not talking, each of them carrying the weight of the following night in their own way. Outside, the desert was cold and absolutely still. Somewhere across town, in a rented house on a street, she now knew the name of Elliot Farrow was doing whatever Elliot Farrow did in the hours before he moved. Reviewing his schedule, reassessing his timeline. Understanding that something had changed, that his subject had gone somewhere he hadn't anticipated, that the control he needed to maintain was slipping in ways that would require him to accelerate. He would come to the Desert Rose. Wrench was certain, and Wrench's certainty was the specific certainty of a man who had looked at the complete pattern and followed it to its logical end. He would come because men like him always came when the thing they believed they owned moved out of reach. And when he came, Callie Riazes would be standing behind the counter, alone under the flickering neon of the Desert Rose, wearing a device that would send his words to 3 different places simultaneously before he finished speaking them. And 11 feet above her, on the flat roof of the diner, a 54-year-old man with a gray braided beard and clear blue eyes would be listening to every word. She drank her coffee. Stone drank his. The night held. The following night came the way desert nights come, without warning, without gradation, the sky going from gray to black as if a switch had been thrown somewhere out past the horizon. Callie had slept 4 hours in the afternoon. She had sat with Nora for an hour before her mother took the girl back to the bolted room, Nora asking questions about why they were staying somewhere new. Callie answering them with the careful half-truths you tell small children when the full truth is too heavy for their small shoulders to carry. She had eaten something she couldn't later remember the taste of. And then at 10 o'clock she had put on her blue uniform and stood still while Wrench fitted the device against her sternum for the last time and ran his final check. "It's running," she said. "Running," he confirmed. She tucked in her shirt. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the back of the van door. A woman in a blue uniform, dark hair tied back. The same face she had been looking at in mirrors for 23 years, but with something in the eyes that had not been there before 3 weeks ago. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. the knowledge of what the world actually contained. "Let's go," she said. The Desert Rose looked exactly the same from the outside. Same flickering neon rose above the door, its pink-red light catching the surface of Route 66 in slow, irregular pulses. Same cracked asphalt parking lot, same plate glass windows showing the interior counter and the row of booths beyond it. Same flat desert sky pressing down from above the stars, hard and cold and indifferent. But the darkness around it was different tonight. In the field across Route 66, behind a low rise of scrub and gravel, 50 motorcycles sat with their engines cold and their lights off. Their riders sat with them or crouched beside them, leather against desert floor, invisible from the road. In the lot behind the diner, 3 more men were positioned behind the dumpster and the utility boxes, so still they had become part of the architecture. Flint was inside the broken-down semi-truck angled across the main entrance with a clear sight line to the front door. Wrench was in a panel van parked 200 yards east on Route 66, with his laptop open and 3 live feeds running on the screen simultaneously. Cinder was on the access ladder on the north side of the building, one hand on the rail waiting. And on the flat roof of the Desert Rose, lying on his stomach on the cold concrete with his chin on his folded arms, Stone watched the road. He had been up there for 90 minutes. The desert cold had worked its way through his jacket and into the bones of his shoulders, but he had been cold before in positions like this one, waiting for things that mattered, and the cold was just information. His eyes moved in slow, regular arcs across the highway and the lot, and the approaches from both directions, the way eyes move when they have been trained to watch rather than just look. Inside the diner, through the skylight panel in the roof's center, he could see the top of Callie's head moving between the counter and the service station. She had been composed from the moment she put the uniform on. He had watched her do it. She had buttoned the blue shirt with steady hands, while Wrench made his final adjustments, and her hands had not shaken once. Stone had seen a lot of different kinds of courage in his 54 years. He had a specific respect for the kind that didn't announce itself. Inside the diner was performing its own version of normalcy. The lights were on at their usual level. The coffee maker was running. The pie case was lit. Callie had arranged the counter in the service station exactly as it looked on any other night shift. The stack of order pads, the coffee cups on their hooks, the napkin dispensers at each booth. She had made herself a cup of coffee and put it at the service station, and she stood with both hands around it and watched Route 66 through the plate glass window. Midnight came and passed. She poured out the cold coffee and made fresh. She wiped the counter. She straightened the sugar dispensers in the booths, moving through each one in order 1, 2, 3, 4. She paused at booth 4, Elliot Farrow's booth, and looked at the worn red vinyl of the seat. She thought about all the nights he had sat in this specific spot and watched her and felt himself in control of something. She thought about what it meant to a person like that, a person for whom control was not a preference but a fundamental requirement of existing in the world, to have that thing move outside his reach. She went back to the counter. At 12:31, her phone buzzed. Wrench from the van, one word east. She did not look at the window. She picked up a coffee cup and began polishing it with a bar towel facing the service station, her back 3/4 to the door. The headlights swept across the front window at 12:43. They didn't swing into a parking spot. They came straight up to the front of the building and stopped, mounting the curb, the engine running. Callie heard the car door open. She heard it close. She heard footsteps on the concrete apron, fast and deliberate, carrying none of the measured patience of every previous visit. The bell above the door hit the frame hard. Cold air came in, carrying the smell of the desert and something beneath it, adrenaline and disrupted control chemical, and close. Callie turned around. Elliot Farrow was not wearing a suit. He was in dark jeans and a black turtleneck and leather gloves, and the careful assembly of his usual presentation was gone entirely. His hair was not combed back. His face had the specific quality of a man who has spent 2 days in the compressed circling space of his own obsession and has emerged from it having made a decision he cannot walk back from. His eyes were bloodshot and bright at the same time, and they found Callie immediately, and what was in them was not the cold, precise focus of his booth 4 surveillance. What was in them was something much simpler and much more dangerous. He was done being patient. He crossed the diner in 8 steps and stopped at the counter close enough that Callie could see the pulse in his throat. He did not sit down. "You're hard to find," he said. His voice had lost its smooth register. What was underneath was harder and less controlled, and Callie understood in that moment exactly what Stone had told her, that men like this could not stop themselves from explaining. The need to be understood, to have the victory witnessed and acknowledged, was as fundamental to them as hunger. "I stayed with a friend," Callie said. She kept her voice at its working register, not performing calm, just occupying it. "I was scared." "You don't need to be scared." He put both gloved hands on the counter. "You just need to listen. I've been very patient, Callie. More patient than I've ever been with anyone." "I know," she said. "No." His voice sharpened. "You don't. You ran. You disappeared for 2 days. Do you understand what that does?" He was leaning forward now, the counter between them, a diminishing distance. "I had a plan. Everything was arranged. And you disrupted it." "I'm sorry," she said. Not because she meant it, because the device needed his words, and his words required her to keep him talking. "You should be." He straightened up. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and removed something and set it on the counter between them. A set of keys. Chrome plain, unremarkable. "I'm done waiting," he said. "The game is over. You're coming with me now." "I can't," Callie said. "I'm working. Please, Daryl." "That's not my name. That's... The words came out with a force that was half anger and half the sharp, specific fury of a man whose mask has slipped in front of someone he needed to believe in the mask. "And you're not working." He gestured at the empty diner, the unoccupied booths, the Route 66 outside with its minimal traffic. "This is a waitress job at a roadside diner. This is not your life. This is what you do until your life starts." "I don't understand what you want from me," Callie said. "I want you to stop pretending you don't know." His voice dropped, became more intimate, which was worse in a way that Callie felt in her sternum. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks. I know who you are. I know how you move. I know what you're afraid of and what you want and what you need. And I know that what you have here, the gesture again broader, is not what you deserve." "My daughter is here," Callie said. "My life is here." Something moved across his face, a calculation completing itself. "Your daughter," he said. The word in his mouth was a key turning in a lock. "Nora," he said, and the name on his lips was the most frightening thing Callie had heard in 3 weeks of frightening things. 4 years old, goes to the Sunrise Learning Center on Amboy Road. Her teacher is a woman named Patterson. She likes the sandbox and she doesn't like the art station because she doesn't like getting her hands messy. He looked at Callie with those bloodshot, calculating eyes. "I know everything about your daughter. And I know people, very specific, people in the county welfare and family court system who owe my father significant favors." Callie's hands were on the counter. She kept them still. "One phone call," Farrow said. "One call from my father to the right clerk. Neglect report filed anonymously. Investigation opened. Mother works overnight shifts, child in the care of an elderly guardian, inadequate supervision documented by a county inspector who knows what he's supposed to find." He let that sit in the air between them. "Nora goes into the system on a Tuesday, and you spend the next 2 years trying to get her back through a family court where every judge knows my father's name." "You would do that?" Callie said. She spoke clearly, every word placed precisely. "You would hurt a 4-year-old child." "I would do whatever is necessary," Farrow said, "to make you understand that this is not a negotiation. You belong with me. I have spent 3 weeks making that clear, and you have spent 3 weeks pretending otherwise, and I am finished with the pretending." He came around the end of the counter. Callie stepped back. She hit the soda fountain behind her, the edge of the machine, hard against her lower back. "Don't," she said. "Get your jacket," he said. "We're leaving." She moved to her left toward the kitchen. He moved faster, and his hand closed around her upper arm, the fingers digging in hard through the fabric of her uniform, and he pulled her back with a force that spun her half around. "I said get your jacket," he said. "Let go of me." She said it clearly, and she said it for the device, and she said it because it was true. He raised his right hand and slapped her across the face. It was an open-handed blow, hard and precise, delivered with the practiced quality of a man for whom this was not the first time. The impact knocked Callie sideways into the soda fountain, and she felt the sting spread across her cheekbone and the back of her skull connect briefly with the machine, and for a moment the diner tilted around her. She grabbed the edge of the counter and held on. "Nobody is going to help you," Pharaoh said. He said it with the satisfaction of a man delivering a conclusion he has been building toward for a long time. "That's the beauty of this. It's just us. It's always just been us." He grabbed her arm again and pulled her toward the door. She dug her heels in. The linoleum gave her nothing, and he was stronger than he looked, fueled by everything that had been building in him for 3 weeks, and she was moving, despite herself, her feet dragging across the black and white checks of the floor toward the front door. He kicked it open. The cold night air hit them both as he shoved her through the vestibule and out onto the concrete apron, his hands still locked on her arm, steering her toward the BMW. "You're going to love the cabin," he said. He was almost talking to himself now. The monologue of a man who has finally arrived at the moment he has been building toward and is inhabiting it completely. "It's quiet, nobody around for miles. And once you understand, the lights hit them like a wall, blue and red strobing hard through the desert dark coming from the east on Route 66 and swinging into the lot with the squeal of tires and a single bark of siren that cut off abruptly. The cruiser stopped 15 feet away, blocking the BMW, its light bar painting the front of the desert rose in alternating colors. Pharaoh stopped moving. Callie felt the grip on her arm loosen by a fraction, involuntary, a reflex response to unexpected stimulus, and she turned toward the cruiser with a surge of relief so complete it moved through her like something physical. The driver's door opened. Deputy Roy Sasser stepped out. He had his hand on his holster. He walked toward them with the unhurried stride of a man who has arrived exactly when he intended to arrive. His pale eyes moved from Callie to Pharaoh, and what they specifically and deliberately did not do was register alarm at what they saw. A woman with a red mark spreading across her cheekbone. A man with his gloved hand on her arm. These were not things that Sasser's eyes treated as problems requiring resolution. "Let her go, Elliot," Sasser said. "Not Daryl. Elliot." Callie stopped moving. Pharaoh released her arm. He straightened his turtleneck with his free hand, composure returning in increments, the calculation in his eyes going from disrupted back to operational within the span of 3 seconds. Sasser walked past Callie as if she were a piece of furniture arranged inconveniently in his path. He stopped beside Pharaoh and looked at him with the exasperated patience of a man managing a recurring problem that should have been handled more carefully. "You're sloppy," Sasser said. "She was being difficult," Pharaoh said. "You hit her." Sasser glanced at Callie's cheek, not with concern, with the assessing look of a man estimating the visibility of a complication that will require management. "That's going to need a story." "Then make one," Pharaoh said. "That's what you're here for." Sasser sighed in the way that men sigh when they are performing weariness for an audience. He turned toward Callie. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt, and Callie understood. Not as a surprise, the understanding was there before the action, completing itself with the terrible clarity of something she had almost known since the moment she walked out of his office 3 weeks ago, with the feeling of a door being closed on her from the inside. "Get up, Miss Reeves," Sasser said. She started. "You're under arrest." He took her wrist and the cuff went on with a practiced snap. "Assaulting a prominent local businessman. We'll figure out the rest on the way." He leaned down until he was close to her ear, his voice dropping to the flat register of a man who has said things like this before and has never been held to account for any of them. "This is how the world works, sweetheart. The Pharaohs run this county. Judge Pharaoh got me this badge and this job in this town, and you are a waitress on Route 66, and those two facts mean exactly what you think they mean." He straightened up. He looked at Pharaoh. "Put her in your car. I'll follow." "We staged the accident on the overpass. Single mother, late night, the road was wet." Pharaoh smiled. It was the same smile Callie had seen at the diner counter on the very first night, tight and thin, and never reaching the eyes but with something layered beneath it now. The specific satisfaction of a man who has arrived at the end of a plan that has worked exactly as designed. "My father will remember this," Pharaoh said. "He always does," Sasser said. Pharaoh took Callie's other arm. She pulled against them both. She was handcuffed and outweighed, and there were two of them, and the plan had assumed the police were corrupted, but had not fully accounted for the specific reality of being handcuffed by the corruption while the trap was still closing. She looked at the roof of the diner. She could not see him, but she knew he was there 11 feet up, and she held on to that certainty the way you hold on to a fixed point when everything else is in motion. They dragged her toward the BMW. She dug her heels in. Her left shoe caught a crack in the asphalt, and she went down on one knee, which cost Pharaoh his grip on her arm, and she used the 2 seconds of that to scream, not out of panic, not helplessly, but deliberately aimed at the night around her, like a signal flare sent into the dark on purpose. A voice came from above. Hey! One word, carrying through the cold desert air with the absolute unhurried authority of a man who has never needed volume to be heard. Sasser and Pharaoh both stopped. Both looked up. On the flat roof of the Desert Rose, standing now silhouetted against the winter stars, was Stone. His hands were at his sides. His jacket was open. His gray beard caught the strobing light from the police cruiser below, and the whole of him, 6'4" of faded leather and absolute stillness, occupied the roofline, like something that had been built into the structure of the building itself. "You boys having a party," he said. Sasser's hand went to his holster. "Police, get down from there. Hands where I can see them." Stone stepped to the edge of the roof. He did not put his hands up. He looked down at Sasser with the same steady blue eyes he brought to everything, and he said, "I don't think so." And the desert came alive. It did not happen gradually. It happened all at once in the space between one heartbeat and the next 50 pairs of headlights, burning on simultaneously from every direction, from the field across Route 66 and the lot behind the diner and the access road to the east and the gravel shoulder to the west. The darkness that had been empty and absolute became in one single instant a wall of light surrounding the Desert Rose on all sides. And then the engine started. 50 V-twin engines turning over simultaneously is not a sound that has an easy comparison. It begins as individual voices and becomes within 2 seconds something that is less sound than force, a low-rolling physical pressure that comes up through the ground and through the soles of your feet and into your chest and does not let go. It filled the desert air the way thunder fills the air before a serious storm, and it did not diminish. It held, and it built, and it kept building. From behind the dumpster, Cinder and 2 others stepped into the light. From the broken semi, Flint dropped to the asphalt and walked forward. From the field across the highway, figures appeared in ones and twos, and then in groups, moving to the road and crossing it and entering the lot with the unhurried, purposeful movement of men who are not rushing because there is nowhere for anyone to go. Leather cuts, road names, the death's head in red and white on 50 backs moving through the light. Sasser spun in a slow circle, his gun out, now his hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Back off, I am a law enforcement officer, I will—" Stone was coming down the ladder on the side of the building. He descended with the deliberate weight of a man who does not hurry because the situation is already resolved and he knows it. His boots hit the asphalt, and he turned and walked towards Sasser, and the walking was its own statement, straight, unhurried, closing the distance between them, with the complete absence of concern for the man pointed at his chest. He stopped 6 feet from Sasser. He spread his arms wide. "Shoot me," he said. His voice was perfectly level. "Go ahead, and then count how many seconds you have before you can't reload." Sasser looked at him. He looked at the men behind him and on both sides of him and filling the road across the highway in an unbroken line. He looked at the gun in his own hand, which was shaking visibly now. He was doing the mathematics that every man does when he understands that the situation has inverted completely, and the position he believed he occupied no longer exists in any meaningful sense. He lowered the gun. In the same moment, Cinder reached Pharaoh. Pharaoh had been backing toward the BMW, his keys in his hand, calculating the geometry of the situation with the quick, desperate arithmetic of a man looking for any exit that remains available. He made it 2 steps before Cinder's hand closed on the collar of his turtleneck and lifted him off the ground with the casual, single-motion ease of a man picking up something that doesn't weigh very much. Pharaoh made a sound that was not quite a word. "Your daddy's not here," Cinder said. He set Pharaoh against the hood of the BMW the way you set something down when you want it to stay exactly where you put it. Pharaoh stayed. Wrench had come from the van. He walked past Sasser without looking at him, went directly to Callie, and crouched down beside her, where she was still on one knee on the asphalt. He produced a key from his jacket pocket, the same type as Sasser's, because Wrench prepared for specific contingencies and unlocked the handcuff on her wrist. He checked her face, looking at the mark on her cheekbone with clinical brevity, then looked at her eyes. "Can you stand?" he said. "Yes," she said. He helped her up anyway. Then Wrench turned to face Sasser. He reached into his shirt pocket and removed the device, small black, its red light, still blinking in steady rhythmic pulses. He held it up at the level of Sasser's face and let the deputy look at it for a long, specific moment. "Live feed," Wrench said, "started when she put the uniform on. Everything from the moment he walked through that door." He gestured at the diner behind them. "Audio and video, time-stamped. Triple server back before any of it can be touched by anyone." He paused. "It went to the FBI Los Angeles field office. It went to the ACLU regional director." Another pause, the pause of a man who has saved the most important item for last. "And it went to Margot Ellison at the LA Times, who has been building a file on Judge Harlan Farrow for 3 years, and who is at this moment sitting in a car outside this building, watching it on her laptop." Sasser looked at the blinking red light. He looked at it with the expression of a man watching the specific mechanism of his own destruction operate in real time with complete efficiency in a way that cannot be reversed. "You can't," he started. "We did," Stone said. He stepped past Sasser and walked to Callie. He looked at her face, the red mark on her cheekbone, the particular quality of a person who has been through something and is still standing inside it. He looked at her with those steady blue eyes, and what was in them was not pity and not apology, and not the performed concern of someone who needed her to receive them in a certain way. It was recognition, plain and direct and complete. He reached into his jacket and produced the handcuff key he had taken from Sasser's belt, without Sasser noticing during his approach across the lot. He set it in Callie's palm and closed her fingers around it. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You came," she said. Her voice was level, but something underneath it was not. "Told you," he said. "We weren't done." The FBI arrived in 11 minutes, 2 vehicles moving fast on Route 66 from the west, their lights cutting hard through the desert dark. They came into the lot, and the men who stepped out of them moved with the compressed efficiency of people who had been watching a live feed for the past 40-plus minutes and knew exactly what they were walking into. Stone and his men did not wait for introductions or acknowledgments. Before the federal vehicles had completed their turn into the lot, the 50 motorcycles positioned in the surrounding dark had begun one by one to turn over and pull away. Not in a rush, not in flight, just in the quiet, orderly departure of people who have finished what they came to do and have no interest in the paperwork that follows. By the time the agents reached the center of the lot, the field across Route 66 was dark again, and the access road was empty, and the only Hells Angels remaining were Stone, Wrench, Flint, and Cinder standing at the edge of the light in a loose group, unhurried and waiting. Stone spoke to the senior agent for 4 minutes. He handed over the handcuffed Sasser and the restrained Farrow, and the device which Wrench transferred carefully to an evidence bag the agent produced. Stone gave his name and a contact number and answered 3 direct questions with 3 clean, direct answers. Then he stepped back. The agents took it from there. Callie sat on the hood of her car, which Flint had brought from wherever she'd parked it, appearing with the keys without being asked, and watched Sasser and Farrow being placed in separate vehicles. She watched Farrow's face as he was guided into the back seat. The calculation was still running in his eyes, still sorting through what remained of his options. She knew that in his mind, he was already making the call to his father, already expecting the familiar machinery to engage and begin its work of making this disappear. She hoped he would have a very long time to understand that this time the machinery was jammed beyond repair. What followed happened in layers over the days and weeks that came after. The FBI moved on the cabin outside 29 Palms within 48 hours. The access road and the structure were secured before dawn on the second day, and what the agents found there was the kind of thing that does not stay quiet regardless of how many judges have, how many relationships with how many officials. The basement room was soundproofed and equipped with the specific permanence of something that was meant to be used repeatedly over a long period of time. And in a sealed storage unit within that room, cataloged with the meticulous organization of a man who kept his trophies with care, were personal items belonging to 3 women. Ellen Marsh's driver's license, Patricia Dowd's watch, Susan Alcott's journal, its last entry dated 6 years and 2 months ago. The investigation into Judge Harlan Farrow began within 72 hours of the night at the Desert Rose. And it was not the kind of investigation that could be quietly managed or redirected. Because Margot Ellison's first piece ran in the LA Times on the morning of the second day, and it became the most read article on the paper's website in 4 years. She had the live feed footage. She had Wrench's documentation of the identity history and the Denver connections and Sasser's transfer record. She had 3 years of her own sourcing on Judge Farrow's pattern of judicial interference. She put all of it together with the specific surgical skill of a journalist who knows that the facts laid plainly in sequence require no embellishment. The piece was shared 2 million times in the first 24 hours. Judge Harlan Farrow resigned his federal seat on the fourth day in a statement of 6 sentences read by his attorney that contained no apology and no acknowledgement and convinced no one of anything. He disappeared from public life within a week. His name, which had appeared on courtrooms and legal briefs and judicial decisions for 14 years, became overnight the kind of name people said in a specific tone, the tone reserved for things that have been revealed as something fundamentally other than what they appeared. Roy Sasser took a plea agreement. He provided testimony against the Farrow family's network of favors and arrangements and systematically buried evidence. And in exchange for that cooperation, his sentence was reduced from life to 25 years. He was placed in protective custody within the prison system because a deputy who had handcuffed an innocent woman and delivered her to a serial predator on a well-lit night that 50 people witnessed, and the entire internet had subsequently seen, was not a man who would find comfortable company in general population. He was a man without a country, despised by the law he had betrayed and by the lawless he had served, trusted by no one, protected by a system that kept him alive, mostly to ensure his testimony remained available. Elliot Farrow stood trial 7 months later on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping. The physical evidence from the cabin was comprehensive and unambiguous. The live feed from the Desert Rose provided 41 minutes of his own voice in his own words, making statements that his defense team spent the entire trial attempting to contextualize and failed at completely. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He would die in a cell. He would never see open sky without bars or wire in front of it again. In whatever version of the world he had constructed in his mind, the one in which he was the kind of man who could own people, who could operate above consequence, who could build a hunting cabin in the Mojave and fill it with trophies and never be called to account for any of it. That version ended on a Tuesday night on Route 66 in Needles, California, when a 23-year-old waitress leaned across a counter and whispered 6 words to the right person. In Pueblo, Colorado, a woman named Renee Marsh received a phone call from an FBI victim specialist on a Thursday morning in early spring. She sat down on the floor of her kitchen when she understood what she was being told. She had been waiting 6 years for a call that contained a fact instead of a silence. She wept for a long time. Then she called her sister. Then she called the number the specialist gave her and began the process of bringing her daughter home. The Desert Rose reopened on a Monday. Hank Pruitt had scrubbed the floor twice and wiped down every surface and replaced the coffee maker with a newer model he had been meaning to buy for 2 years, and the diner looked on the inside exactly as it had always looked. The red vinyl booths, the Formica counter, the pie case lit in full, the neon rose above the door sending its slow, irregular pulse of pink-red light out across Route 66. Callie came in for her shift at 11. She wore her blue uniform. Her hair was tied back. The yellow remnant of the bruise on her cheekbone had faded to something barely visible in the diner light, and her eyes when she came through the door were clear and direct in a way they had not been in a long time. She looked at the booths as she came in 1, 2, 3, 4, and she looked at booth 4. The way you look at a place where something used to be and is not anymore, with the neutral acknowledgement of a person who has fully processed the absence and filed it correctly. She went behind the counter. She tied her apron. She started a fresh pot of coffee. At 1 in the morning, when the diner was down to a sleeping trucker in the corner and the empty highway outside the bell above the door rang, Stone came in alone. He wore his jacket and his cuts, and he smelled of cold air and the road, and his gray beard was damp at the tips from the desert night. He moved to the counter with his characteristic absence of hurry and took the same stool he had taken on the first night and set his riding glasses on the counter beside him with the same deliberate placement, like a man marking a spot he intends to return to. Callie did not ask him what he wanted. She turned to the back shelf and took the good coffee, the bag she kept separate from the commercial supply, the one she used when the coffee actually mattered, and she filled a cup and put it in front of him. Then she went to the pie case and cut the largest slice of cherry pie in it and set it beside the cup. Stone looked at both of them. He looked at Callie. There was no performance in either of their faces. The situation did not require it, and neither of them was inclined toward it. I heard about the trial, Callie said. She leaned against the back counter with her arms folded, not from defensiveness, but from the comfortable ease of a person standing in their own space. Both of them, consecutive life terms. Stone took a slow sip of the coffee. He let the steam rise around his face for a moment before setting the cup down. The law finally did its job, he said. It took 50 motorcycles and a live feed and a woman at the Times who'd been waiting 3 years, Callie said. Sometimes that's what it takes. You were the only one who listened, she said, from the first night. Sasser had a badge and a legal pad, and he was taking notes, and he was not listening. You listened. Stone set the cup down. He looked at her in the way he had looked at her from the first moment in this diner, directly without performance, reading what was actually there. People like Pharaoh, he said, they divide the world into hunters and prey. They do it because they've gotten away with it long enough that they start believing it's the natural order. They think the badge and the name and the suit put them above whatever is coming for them. He turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands, a rotation that was more thought than action. What they forget is that not everyone in the world fits into one of their two categories. Callie waited. Some people are wolves, he said, and wolves don't show up on a predator's map. He reached into his jacket and put a $20 bill on the counter, pressing it flat with 2 fingers. I can't take that, Callie said. The pie is yours. Everything in this place is yours. Stone shook his head, a small movement but final in the way that all his small movements were final, like something decided rather than performed. Rules of the road, he said. A man pays for his meal. You take that and you buy Nora something she'll like. A doll, a bike, something bright. He looked at the bill on the counter. Something that reminds her that the world has good things in it. Callie looked at the 20. She left it where it was for the moment. Stone finished the coffee. He worked through half the pie with the focused appreciation of a man who means what he does. He set the fork down and pushed the plate aside and sat for a moment looking out through the plate glass window at Route 66 at the empty highway and the dark desert on both sides of it, and the faint, vast suggestion of the Mojave extending away into the distance, flat and indifferent and permanent. Then he looked at booth 4. Empty. The red neon light from the sign above the door laying across the seat in its slow, irregular pulse. The vinyl undisturbed. The table clean. You're going to be okay, Callie, he said. Not a question, not a wish. The flat declarative certainty of a man who has decided something is true and has the particular authority that comes from having made certain things true himself. I know, she said. He looked at her. Because I know who to call, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. It was brief and it was private, and it was the expression of a man who has spent 4 years carrying a weight that does not go away and has found in an unexpected place on an unexpected night something that makes the weight possible to carry without being destroyed by it. Not absolution, not forgiveness. Something more useful than either the knowledge that the story does not always end the same way. That sometimes a man who was somewhere else gets to be somewhere else again in the better sense. That sometimes the phone call comes in time. He nodded once, sharp and brief and complete. He put his glasses back on. He stood up from the stool, the full height of him, the jacket and the patches and the gray braided beard, and he walked to the door and pushed through it into the cold Route 66 night. The bell rang behind him with its familiar jangle. A few seconds later, the Harley turned over that particular sound, that deep-throated rhythmic thunder that she had first heard 3 weeks ago as something frightening and now heard as something entirely different, and pulled out of the lot and onto the highway heading west. Callie stood at the counter and listened to it go. The sound diminished down Route 66, fading into the desert distance, and what it left behind was not silence exactly, but the specific quality of absence that follows the departure of something that was for a time exactly what was needed. She turned back to the counter. She took the $20 bill and folded it and put it in the pocket of her apron where she would find it the next morning, and take it to the toy store on 5th Street and stand in the aisle for a long time before deciding on a red bicycle with white grip tape and a silver bell that Nora would ring approximately 400 times on the first day, laughing each time as if the bell had surprised her, as if joy could be discovered over and over in the same small action. She picked up a bar towel and wiped the counter, the long, practiced stroke of a person who knows how to work, and finds in the work itself a kind of ground to stand on, a kind of return to the self that difficulty cannot permanently displace. She looked at her reflection in the glass of the pie case. A woman in a blue uniform, dark hair tied back, a face that had been through something and come out the other side with its eyes open and its instincts intact. A woman who had stood in a diner on Route 66 at the edge of the Mojave and had been failed by every mechanism that was supposed to protect her and had found in the unlikeliest of places the one thing she actually needed. Not rescue, not someone to fight her battle in her place, someone who listened. She looked out through the plate glass window at Route 66, at the empty highway, in the dark desert, in the cold winter stars above the Mojave, that had been there before any of this, and would be there long after all of it had faded into whatever stories people told about nights on this stretch of road. The world was full of men, like Elliot Farrow. She knew that now in a way she had not known it before, not as an abstraction, not as something that happened to other people in other places, but as a fact of the specific world she moved through every day, concrete and close and real. But the world was also full of men like Stone. And she knew now with the same concrete specificity that those men existed, that they were real, that they moved through the same world in the same nights, in the same dark highways, that they were in the places you didn't expect to find them, doing the things that the places you did expect to find protection had long since decided not to do. She had whispered 6 words to one of them, and her life had not ended. She turned off the extra lights at the back of the diner, leaving only the counter and the pie case and the slow pink-red pulse of the neon rose above the door. She straightened the sugar dispensers. She started a final pot of coffee for the small hours of the morning. She looked at Booth 4 one last time. Then she got back to work.